Started. Ow! I just poked myself in the eye with this mascara. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime. Crue Trime. My name is Sarah, and what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like fun to you, then you are in the right place. So make sure that you subscribe to this channel, turn on the notifications, and then that way you will never miss one. So I asked you guys if you wanted me to cover this case in last week's case, and you said yes. So you win. This story is wild and gross. So how did he get away with murder for over 10 years? And why did the police hand his own victim back to him? And what did they find in apartment 213? Let's find out. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. The notes on this case are quite long. We are going to be here for a minute. I hope you have a snack. Also, if you want to know any of the makeup that I use in today's look down in the description box because everything is linked. It's July 22nd, 1991, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was just after 11:30 p.m. and 32-year-old Tracy Edwards was running through the streets, barefoot, handcuffed, and fighting for his life. He flagged down a police car and told the officers inside the kind of story that you'd expect from someone who had just escaped from like Buffalo Bill's basement.
Oh, wait.
He told them that a man named Jeffrey had invited him over for drinks and to take some photographs. But when he got inside the apartment, things got real weird real fast. Tracy was handcuffed at one point. The cops were like, yeah, okay, we can check this out. So they rolled up to apartment 213 of the Oxford Apartments there in Milwaukee, and Jeffrey Dahmer answered the door, shirtless. He calmly just said that the cuffs were a misunderstanding.
A what now?
But he did allow the officers to kind of poke around a little bit, and one officer walked into the bedroom and found a drawer full of Polaroids. And they weren't vacation photos, they weren't selfies, they weren't cute pictures of cats. They were photos of dismembered body parts. Headless torsos in every stage of disassembly, like some kind of human IKEA catalog. At that moment, one of the cops said, "These are real." And boom, it was over. They arrested Jeffrey Dahmer on the spot. Decades of horror finally dragged out into the light. But the true nightmare was just beginning. Because when they searched the apartment, they found a human head in the refrigerator, 2 more in the freezer, a 57-gallon blue drum full of dissolving torsos, and, you know, the cataloged collection of bones, hearts, skulls, and all kinds of body parts. This wasn't really a murder scene, it was a butcher shop. Jeffrey Dahmer confessed to killing 17 young men and boys, most of whom were black, brown, or part of the LGBTQ+ community, people that the system routinely ignored. So how the hell did we get here? Let's back it up, friends. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. His dad, Lionel, was a research chemist at Marquette University, and his mom, Joyce, was a teletype machine instructor who also suffered from severe mental illness and depression. Their marriage was a war zone of screaming matches, instability, and divorce threats.
You shut your mouth when you're talking to me.
Little Jeff was a weird kid. He was obsessed with dead animals, and not in a future vet kind of way, more in a he stored roadkill in jars kind of vibe. By the time he was in high school, he was very much an alcoholic. He would drink in class. He had like a flask that he kept in his shirt pocket. He fancied himself a bit of a class clown. He would mock people with cerebral palsy to get laughs. Just a very charming combination of alcoholism and ableism. Cute. Jeffrey Dahmer had one younger brother, David, who was born in December of 1966. Interestingly and kind of creepily, Jeffrey was the one who got to pick his brother's name, which, you know, lucky the kid's name wasn't Frankenstein.
I want my own ass.
Later in life, David actually stayed completely out of the public eye, like ghost level. After Jeffrey's crimes came to light, David changed his last name and identity and never spoke publicly about his brother, which, makes a lot of sense. Imagine going to a job interview and having that last name and answering the question, any relation to? Yeah, pass. Apologies to anybody watching that has this last name. Well, Jeffrey and David were reportedly not close, especially after their parents divorced. David stayed with their mother, Joyce, and Jeffrey kind of bounced between homes, and they didn't have much of a relationship growing up, and after everything that happened, David cut all ties. So no, Dahmer was not an only child, but he might as well have been. And like any good future serial killer, Dahmer had a double life. The kind of guy that neighbors described as kept to himself. Right before they found skulls in his oven. So, in the summer of 1978 in Bath, Ohio, which is just outside of Akron, Jeffrey Dahmer was freshly 18, freshly graduated from high school, and freshly abandoned. As I mentioned, his mother, Joyce, had pieced out with his little brother, David, and his dad, Lionel, was off living elsewhere. So, now it was just Jeffrey, all alone in the family house with a head full of violent sexual fantasies and a liquor cabinet full of coping mechanisms. And right on time, fate threw him a bone. Threw him a bone, huh? Oh, God.
Stop it.
Enter 18-year-old Stephen Hicks. He was friendly, long-haired, shirtless, just trying to hitchhike to a rock concert, and he was walking along the road near Dahmer's house, and Jeffrey spotted him. He offered him a ride, then he suggested that they go back to his place for a few beers, and Hicks said yes, because it was 1978, and nobody had invented stranger danger yet, I guess. They hung out for a bit, they drank, and then Hicks eventually wanted to leave. Remember, he was going to a concert. But Jeffrey didn't want him to go, so he grabbed a dumbbell and smashed him in the back of the head with it. Then he strangled him to death. Then he played a little 5-on-1 over the corpse before he eventually dragged the body down to the basement. Sorry for the lewd gesture, excuse me. So what do you do with a body when your dad is a chemist and your brain is a dumpster fire? Well, apparently you dismember it in the crawl space, bury the parts in shallow graves, then later dig them up, dissolve the flesh from the bones with acid, and then crush the bones with a sledgehammer and scatter it in the woods like confetti. It was gruesome, it was calculated, and somehow no one suspected a thing. It held him over for a long time because Jeff didn't kill again for a while. He enrolled in Ohio State University, but he flunked out immediately. He's too busy drinking to study, I guess. He enlisted in the U.S. Army, but his alcoholism got so bad that he got the boot after about 2 years. Fast forward about a decade. It's now September 1987. Jeffrey Dahmer was 27 years old, and he was living with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, which is like a quiet suburb of Milwaukee. But then this decade-long dam of restraint cracked. The fantasies were boiling over, and Dahmer was ready to kill again, this time with zero hesitation. I'm roasting. Why am I wearing a sweatshirt? It's June. And I'm sweating. Okay, I am going to go put on a t-shirt. BRB. It's much better. Where was I? Oh, enter 25-year-old Stephen Tuomi. Jeff picked him up from Club 219, which was a gay bar in Milwaukee, and they hit it off, or, Jeff made it seem that way, and he invited Stephen back to the Ambassador Hotel, because apparently Grandma's house didn't quite scream, sexcapades.
Yeah, no.
So here's where things got peak Dahmer. According to Jeffrey, they were just gonna hang out, but he woke up the next morning and Stephen was dead. No memory of the murder, just blood on his hands and a very real corpse in the bed like some kind of murderous sleepwalking episode. I think we can just kind of put two and two together and probably had too much to drink and blacked out. Jeff panicked and he got himself a massive suitcase. He stuffed Stephen's body into it like a clearance rack mannequin, and then he literally wheeled it out through the hotel lobby. No one batted an eye. He took the body back to Grandma's house where he dismembered it in the basement. He boiled the flesh off of the bones, and he actually kept that head for a couple weeks before smashing it with a sledgehammer. Now, I have questions. So, where was Grandma when he was boiling the body parts? Like, what grandma on earth doesn't check out what's happening in their own kitchen, provide advice on seasoning, tell you not to use the pretty dish towels because they're decorative only? Anyway, 2 months after that murder, Dahmer killed a 14-year-old sex worker named James Doxtutter. Then, in March of 1988, he killed 22-year-old Richard Guerrero after picking him up outside a gay bar. And what followed from 1988 to 1991 was a disturbingly consistent pattern. He would pick up a man at a club, bus stop, or mall. He would offer money for photos or for sex. He would drug their drink with sleeping pills, strangle them, then he would jerk the gherkin over their corpse. He would then dismember their body, keep the skull or other body parts, and photograph the entire process like a grotesque serial killer scrapbook. And most of the time, he did all this stuff right there at his grandma's house, in the basement. He would even sometimes use her bathtub to dismember these bodies. There was one occasion where she complained to Jeffrey about this smell, but he said that it was just some bad meat, which, to be fair, was technically accurate. Eventually, Jeff's grandma had enough of his stinky exploits and his drinking, and she asked him to move out. So in 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer moved into his own apartment in Milwaukee, apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street, soon to become one of the most infamous crime scenes in modern history. The apartment building was old, run down, and in one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. Within 2 days of moving in, he was arrested for drugging and sexually assaulting a 13-year-old boy that he had lured into his apartment. He underwent psychological evaluation and was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. Was he jailed? No. Probation. 2 months later, Jeffrey killed 24-year-old Anthony Sears. Now this is when he started keeping parts as souvenirs. In 1990, he killed 32-year-old Raymond Smith. And it's all like the same process. Lure them in, drug them, kill them, do things with their bodies. Jeffrey Dahmer definitely had a type, and his targets were not random. His victims were mostly young men of color, Black, Latino, Asian, often gay, always vulnerable. And as we've seen in so many other cases, these people were targeted because he knew that they wouldn't be immediately missed or taken seriously. Some were homeless, some were undocumented, some were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He used manipulation, coercion, and cash to lure them in. And the system, saturated with racism and homophobia, just allowed it to keep happening. In 1990, he killed 27-year-old Edward Smith. He tried to preserve his skeleton by baking it in the oven, but he ended up destroying it. Apparently bones explode. About 3 months later, he killed Ernest Miller, a 22-year-old dancer, and he successfully preserved his skeleton. I guess he figured that thing out. 3 weeks after that, he killed 22-year-old David Thomas, but he didn't keep any of his body parts this time. In 1991, he killed 17-year-old Curtis Straughter, keeping his skull, hands, and wedding tackle. 2 months later, he lured 19-year-old Errol Lindsay to his apartment where he drugged him, then drilled a hole in his skull and injected hydrochloric acid into the hole. He was like trying to create a sex zombie. The idea was that the body would work, but they would just be like, mind mush, just compliant and just do whatever he wanted. It did not work, obviously. So he ended up cutting him up and keeping his skull. Naturally.
Collect the whole set.
By 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was murdering people at like a horrifying pace. Sometimes there was a new victim every week. His apartment was pretty much a slaughterhouse. His freezer was a morgue. Sometimes he kept body parts. Sometimes he ate them.
Jesus Christ.
At any rate, nobody stopped him. In May of 1991, he drugged Tony Hughes, who was a 31-year-old deaf man. He murdered him, obviously, despite the fact that they had actually formed a bit of a bond. So the relationship between Jeffrey Dahmer and Tony Hughes stood out in a case filled with this horrific transactional violence because for once, it appeared that Jeffrey Dahmer might have tried to form an emotional connection before doing what he always did: dehumanize, kill, dismember. Tony Hughes was 31 and he had been deaf and mute since he was a kid. There was like a childhood illness that caused this. And he communicated primarily through sign language and written notes, and he was known by his friends and family as kind, warm, and full of life. He lived independently in Milwaukee and he worked as a model sometimes, and he was active in the local LGBTQ scene. Jeff met Tony at Club 219, which was one of his regular hunting grounds. And despite this communication barrier, the two reportedly spent time together over multiple days. Some sources say that Tony went willingly with Jeff, possibly hoping for a relationship, or at least companionship. So the speculation, including from Dahmer himself during interviews, was that Jeffrey felt some kind of emotional attachment to Tony. He later said that he was fond of him, and he described Tony as attractive and nice. So at some point during their time together, Dahmer drugged and killed Tony Hughes like he had done so many others. And he later told the police that he did this because he didn't want him to leave. And again, we're talking about a guy who could have just asked someone to stay, but instead chose murder. Now, Tony's mother, Shirley Hughes, became one of the most outspoken and heartbroken voices among the victims' families. She never accepted Dahmer's version of events, and she believed Tony had no interest in sex work. She said that her son had simply been looking for friendship and had been taken advantage of. By mid-1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was fully in serial killer overdrive. His apartment in Milwaukee was an actual nightmare. It was filled with rotting, stinking body parts, so how the hell did anybody not complain about the stench? Oh yeah, they did. Let's take the smell test, shall we? So within weeks of moving into the Oxford apartments in 1988, neighbors had started noticing something was seriously off. Complaints started rolling in about a putrid, rotting smell coming from his unit, buzzsaw sounds at all hours, strange screaming, and a revolving door of young men, most of whom were never seen again. When confronted with this, Dahmer's excuse was, sorry, I had some meat go bad in the freezer. Sir. In 1990, the building manager, Sopa Princewill, actually entered the apartment to investigate. She found a strong, gag-worthy smell, piles of garbage, and a suspicious vat of liquid. Dahmer shrugged and blamed it on dead tropical fish.
Sure, Jan.
Multiple neighbors, including Glendella Cleveland, called the police to report this unbearable smell, the weird sounds, and a literal naked, bleeding child trying to escape. The result? Well, the police walked into Dahmer's apartment, sniffed the air, ignored the acid barrel in the corner, and left with zero follow-up. So yeah, the smell test, it worked, but no one cared because the guy involved was white and seemed normal. And the people doing the complaining were mostly poor and black and ignored. But hang on a second, what was that little nugget about a bleeding child trying to escape from Jeff's apartment? I'm glad you asked. On May 27th, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer approached 14-year-old Konarak Synthesomphone near the Grand Avenue Mall. He offered him $50 cash to come back to his place, take a few photos, and hang out, and Konarak agreed. Back at apartment 213, Jeffrey Dahmer, of course, drugged this boy, but this time he didn't just wait for him to pass out. Oh no. He drilled a hole in his skull when he was still alive, and he poured hydrochloric acid into his brain. Remember, he was trying to make a sex zombie? Like, why would he think that this would work? Unbelievably, Konarak survived this initial torture. Dahmer had actually left the apartment to get more beer because apparently murder made him thirsty. And while he was gone, Konarak escaped. Drugged, naked, bleeding from his head, stumbled out into the street. And two women, Sandra Smith and Nicole Childress, saw Konarak and called 911. You know, they tried to help him, to cover him up, and they begged these cops to intervene. But then Dahmer walks up from the store with his beer, calm as ever. He told the responding officers that this was just like a lover's quarrel, that he was just drunk. He said that this was his 19-year-old boyfriend. Jeffrey was over 30 years old at this time. The officers were like, yeah, that looks legit. They even walked Konarak back up to the apartment. And Dahmer let them inside. They saw the place. They smelled the rotting body in the bedroom. Tony Hughes' corpse was still in the bedroom. They ignored it. They joked about it. And then they left this boy with a killer. The one officer made a joke on the police radio about needing to be deloused after handling a couple of homosexuals. And we all know that's not the word he used. And within an hour, Konarak was dead. Dahmer had injected more acid into his brain and then he dismembered him and he photographed the whole thing. Now, if that's not crazy enough, here's the part that will make you grind your molars down into nubs. Konarak's family actually had a history with Jeffrey Dahmer. 2 years earlier, in 1988, Dahmer had been convicted of molesting Konarak's older brother. Remember that story I told you about him getting in trouble within like 2 weeks of moving into the place? Maybe, was it 2 days? Anyways, it was Konarak's brother. And Jeffrey Dahmer got this slap on the wrist punishment, and the system had known that Jeffrey Dahmer was a straight up predator. But because he was gay, it was icky. And his targets were black and brown people, so nobody cared.
I said what I said!
But you know who did care? Konarak's family, because as soon as he disappeared, they immediately suspected Jeffrey Dahmer, but the police just brushed them off.
Nothing to see here!
Konarak's death could have and should have been the end of Dahmer's reign of terror, but instead, it was just another body added to the pile. Between May and July of 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer went on to kill 4 more young men, and all because nobody listened to the people who were trying to stop him. Not the women on the street, and not the family who had already reported him. In June, Jeffrey Dahmer killed 20-year-old Matt Turner, putting his torso in that 57-gallon plastic drum in his bedroom. Less than 2 weeks after that, he killed 24-year-old Oliver Lacey, keeping his head in the freezer. And 4 days after that, he killed 25-year-old Joseph Braidhoft and kept his head in the fridge, and his torso also went into that drum. And now we're kind of back where we started. So it's July 22nd, 1991, and Jeffrey Dahmer walked up to 32-year-old Tracy Edwards at the mall. Now, Tracy was very street smart and resilient as hell. So as he had successfully done so many times before, Jeffrey offered Tracy $100 cash to come back to his apartment to take some photographs and maybe have a drink, maybe watch a movie. So at that point, we all know that this is like the Jeffrey Dahmer special. And once Tracy got inside the apartment, things turned weird fast. First of all, the place reeked. It smelled like rotting meat and bleach and something not quite definable, but definitely wrong. There was that weird blue barrel in the corner. There was just a power drill laying out. The Exorcist 3 was playing on a loop like it was bedtime TV. And side note, The Exorcist 3 is super weird. The scene with the lady crab walking on the ceiling? Absolutely not. Anyway, this casual hangout got weird fast, and Dahmer handcuffed Tracy, held a knife to his chest, and told him he was going to eat his heart.
What was he trying to do?
Like he was listening to my heart, because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point.
He said he was going to eat your heart?
Yes, that's correct.
But Tracy kept us cool. He played along. He talked softly. He didn't fight.
Are you still in handcuffs?
Yes.
Is he holding the handcuff?
Right.
Do you still have the knife?
Right.
Is it pointed at your side as you've told us before?
Right.
You trying to be cool?
Very much so.
You're not fighting with him?
No.
What's your intention? What are you planning on doing?
Getting away. I was contemplating on at the point jumping out the window. I was basically talking with this person, trying to let him know I was his friend. Yeah.
He waited until Dahmer's guard was down, and then he punched him in the face and bolted out of the door in handcuffs. He flagged down a police car and brought 2 Milwaukee police officers right back into the lion's den. Dahmer answered the door, shirtless, casual, calm. The cops said they were just there to get the handcuff key. Jeffrey nodded and invited them in. And that was when one of the officers noticed something strange. There was a drawer slightly open, and inside, dozens of Polaroids. These Polaroids were of dismembered, decapitated human bodies, photographed in mid-process. The one cop said, "Oh, these are real." Jeffrey tried to run out the door, but the officers tackled him right there. It was official. After 13 years, 17 known victims, and this mountain of ignored warnings, Jeffrey Dahmer was finally under arrest. The real shock came when they searched the apartment. What they found inside? Now I'm going to put a warning right here, but if you've made it this far, you know what they found.
This was the scene earlier this morning. Police hired a private contractor to haul a refrigerator and a tank of acid out of the apartment in the 900 block of North 25th Street. Police found parts of bodies, leading them to believe the man they arrested is a mass murderer.
Let's just take a walk through Jeffrey Dahmer's hellhole, shall we? In the kitchen, human heads in the refrigerator. 2 more heads in the freezer. There was like a Ziploc baggie of human hearts and livers, labeled like leftovers. In the bedroom closet was that barrel filled with some kind of acid with 3 human torsos in various stages of decomposition. There were skulls on the shelf. Some were painted, some were bleached. There was a full skeleton, and there was a shrine in progress, like a table, candles, bones. Definitely not Gothic homemaking vibes.
I don't need your help.
And then there were the photographs, over 80 images of victims in various states of death, dismemberment, and desecration. Think serial killer Pinterest board, but worse. Even the investigators, and these were veterans of homicide units, they had to step outside and barf. One of them said it was the most disturbing thing he'd ever seen. Anyway, so after Jeffrey was apprehended, aside from his half-hearted attempt to run out of the apartment, he didn't fight. He didn't lawyer up. He didn't deny anything. He confessed immediately to everything, and he sat for hours waiving his right to an attorney. He gave detectives this chillingly calm, matter-of-fact rundown of all 17 murders. The written confession was 178 pages long. He detailed the seductions, the killings, the necrophilia, the dismemberments, the cooking, the eating. Did I mention that earlier? That he ate the body parts?
With some fava beans.
He admitted to cooking and eating hearts, livers, and parts of muscles. He explained that he wasn't eating the victims because he enjoyed the flavor. He said that it made him feel powerful. I don't know if that's more or less disturbing, honestly. He didn't see cannibalism as an act of violence. He saw it as a way to preserve a connection. But to Dahmer, it was about stopping people from leaving. He craved absolute control, and consuming someone, in his mind, was the ultimate form of control.
Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me.
He told them all about his cockamamie sex zombies. He admitted to necrophilia, to skull collecting. He admitted to everything. He didn't want these people to leave, so he made sure they couldn't. If it wasn't so disturbing and gruesome, it would be pretty sad, actually, pitiful. He also said that he felt relieved to have been caught, that he was glad it was over. Yeah, well, tell that to the families that are never going to get their sons back, who never even got their bodies to bury. Police later admitted that 5 of the victims had been killed after Conorak synthesomphone escaped and was handed back to Dahmer. 5 more people. Because nobody listened. Because of racism and homophobia and negligence and apathy. It took a victim surviving, saving himself, to end it. Jeffrey Dahmer's court hearing began on January 30th, 1992 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it was the kind of media circus that you'd expect from a case that included the worst things that humanity has to offer. Journalists, grieving families, and gawkers packed the courtroom. Jeffrey Dahmer was charged with 15 counts of murder in Wisconsin, and he later confessed to 2 more in Ohio. He pleaded guilty, but insane, admitting to the killings, but arguing that he was mentally ill. Specifically, that his compulsions and fantasies and disorders rendered him incapable of stopping. So the court case lasted about 2 weeks, and it wasn't to determine his guilt. They had already had his confession. This was to determine if he was culpable. The prosecutors made their case very clearly. Dahmer was methodical. He lured the victims, he drugged them, he killed them, dismembered them, and then tried to keep parts of them forever. He wasn't in a delusional psychosis. He was calculating, and he concealed evidence. So he knew what he was doing, and he knew it was wrong. They brought in forensic experts, psychologists, police officers, and family members of the victims. The courtroom heard all about the Polaroids, the shrine, the skulls. The defense, meanwhile, argued that Jeffrey was deeply mentally ill. He was suffering from necrophilia, borderline personality disorder, schizotypical disorder. They pointed to his attempts to make these sex zombies and the sheer horror of the crimes, proof that he couldn't possibly be sane. But here's the thing, even the defense's experts had to admit that Dahmer was aware of what he was doing. He hid the bodies, he lied to the police, he covered his tracks. That legally means he's sane. And the jury agreed because on February 15th, 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was found legally sane and guilty of 15 murders. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. He was also later extradited back to Ohio for his very first murder, the hitchhiker, Stephen Hicks, and he received another life sentence. In a final statement, Dahmer told the court, quote, "I never wanted freedom. Frankly, I wanted death. I should have stayed with God. I tried and failed on my own, and this is the only way I know how to find peace." The families of the victims were not buying this baloney. Several of them gave gut-wrenching victim impact statements, and one woman, a sister of one of the victims, lunged at him in court.
Jeffrey, I hate you, motherfucker! I hate you! Nothing's out of control! Don't fuck with me, Jeffrey! I kill you, goddammit! Look at me, motherfucker! I can kill you!
Hurt you, Nathan.
I can kill you!
Dahmer was remitted to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. He reportedly found religion behind bars because, of course he did. He also spent a lot of time with his dad, Lionel, who publicly forgave him and co-authored a book, which, yikes. But then karma punched its time card. On November 28th, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was allowed out of isolation and assigned to a work detail. He was doing like janitorial type work with some of the other inmates, including Jesse Anderson, who was a man who murdered his wife, and Christopher Scarver, who was mentally ill and convicted of a 1990 murder. Well, they were left unsupervised while cleaning a prison bathroom, which is not a great call. Within 20 minutes, both Dahmer and Anderson were beaten to death with a metal bar that was taken from like the prison gym. Scarver later said that he had snapped because both men mocked him, and he especially resented Dahmer's crimes against black men and the way that Dahmer would joke in prison. He would use his food to mimic body parts and like use ketchup for blood.
Disgusting.
Yes, really. Scarver said that he killed them both as a form of divine justice, claiming, quote, "God told me to do it."
Those are the rules.
Dahmer was pronounced dead at 9:11 a.m. on November 28, 1994. The Dahmer case scarred the country, and it highlighted how law enforcement failed LGBTQ+ victims, especially victims of color. It exposed this racism and homophobia and apathy that's just baked into the system. The Oxford apartments in Milwaukee were demolished in November of 1992 out of respect for the victims and their families and to erase this horrific association. The decision to tear it down was made by city leaders and the apartment owners in response to public outrage and community trauma. The lot remains vacant to this day, and it's been used for community healing events and is unofficially known as a memorial green space, although there's no formal monument or marker. Many family members of the victims supported the demolition, feeling that no one should have to live in a place with that kind of history, and that keeping the building would have just turned it into a macabre tourist attraction. The families of the victims never truly got justice. They got headlines, trauma, and years of media exploitation, including that Netflix series that reenacted their pain without permission. As for Jeffrey Dahmer, he's become kind of a Crue Trime boogeyman, synonymous with Hannibal Lecter.
People will say we're in love.
But let's be clear, he was not a genius. He wasn't twistedly brilliant. He was a deeply broken, pathetic predator who got away with murder because the system let him. This case is brutal, not just because of what Jeffrey Dahmer did, but because of how many people could have stopped it and didn't. And that is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. Well, horrifying. Again, if you want to know what makeup I used in today's look in the description box because everything is linked. If you have a Crue Trime story that you want to recommend to me, there's also a link to a Google document down there. You can click it, fill in all the dirty details. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on all of the other socials as well. I'm so social. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Okay. What? Have I had that thing in my tooth the entire time? You guys gotta tell me these things. Start it. Ow! I'm sorry. I just poked myself in the eye with this mascara. Oh my god. Oh my god. What is in my eye? Fuck. So, chose the new episode. Oh my god.